Good afternoon. Welcome to our last two sessions of Digging Up to Pass, and welcome to anyone who's watching on YouTube. As we go into our fourth session, I think it is that right? And this afternoon we are going to discuss Alexander the Great and the power of prophecy. Because as we discuss his life and the history of his life intersects with Bible prophecy in a very powerful way. And our second session, we're going to deal with the amazing discoveries, some of the amazing discoveries of biblical archaeology. Now, Alexander, he was the son of Philip II of Macedon and his wife Olympias. He was born in July of 356 BC. He was tutored and he was mentored by the great Aristotle, the greatest Greek philosopher of classical antiquity. He claimed Heracles or Hercules and Achilles as his ancestors. And wherever he went, he spread what he believed to be a superior Greek culture, and he made the Greek language the common language of the Middle East. I mean, it was, at his time, Greek was like English is today. And that language, the Greek language, continued up to the time of Christ and beyond. His father, Philip of Macedon, he was murdered in 336 BC in a theatre stage in Greece. And young Alexander then, 20 years old, set out to establish his position as king of Macedon and lord and master of all Greece. Now, in his short reign of just 14 years, he became the ruler of many nations. He became the world's wealthiest man, and he was ultimately worshipped as a god on earth. They proclaimed him a god in Egypt, and here in this relief is Alexander shown as the god Zeus, the Greek god Zeus, with Poseidon on his right and Heracles or Hercules next to him. And after he brought all of Greece under his power, he led an army of 30 to 40,000 infantry and about 4,000 or 5,000 cavalry across the Dardanelles at Gallipoli into Asia Minor or into Turkey in the early spring of 334 BC. And his goal, of course, was the defeat of the Persian Empire. Now, according to estimates, Darius III, the Persian king, had somewhere between 250,000 and 1 million men at his command. And among them were the 10,000 immortals, like the Royal Guard, and 42,000 cavalry. Alexander only had about 47,000 soldiers and 5,000 to 7,000 cavalry. But Alexander had never lost a battle, and he was an absolute brilliant general. Alexander fought the Persians in a series of battles between 336 and 323 BC, and the Persians were defeated in every encounter. And in the last encounter, in the Battle of Arbela or Gaugamela in 331 BC, Darius III fled for his very life, and he was later murdered by his own men a year later in 330 BC. But it is the military genius of Alexander in his famous siege against the seaport city of Tyre on the Lebanon coast that we want to direct your attention to this afternoon. It is here in 332 BC, in Alexander's famous siege of this Phoenician seaport city, where secular history, archaeology, biblical history, and even biblical prophecy all intersect. Now, the country of Lebanon, it's a long, narrow coastal strip of land along the Mediterranean Sea, from Avad in the north to some 22 kilometres below Tyre in the south. Now, Lebanon was home to the people of antiquity known as the Phoenicians. It's a Greek name, and it means the Phoenix men, comes from the Phoenix men, which was from the men who sold purple. Because what the Phoenicians were famous for is their very expensive purple cloth. Now, you can go down, ladies, and buy a dress in purple. Anyone wearing purple today? Easy, no problem. But you go back to Alexander's day, no peasant wore purple, no commoner wore it. It was for the elite, the very wealthy elite. The much sought after purple dye of the Phoenicians was procured from this murex shellfish, and it was known, the dye, in the cloth was known as Tyrian purple. It took 12,000 snails, of these little water snails of the murex brendaris, to yield no more than 1.4 grams of pure dye, enough to colour only the hem of a single garment. In other words, it was extremely expensive, and only the wealthy and the elite wore purple in their clothing. That's why it's called the royal purple. And it was sold to kings and nobles and the wealthy all over the ancient Mediterranean world. The Phoenicians, they founded 4 city-states on the Lebanon coast, that of Tyre, and just to the north of that, Sidon, and then there was Byblos and Beirut along the coast of Lebanon. Now, this is modern Tyre today, last time I visited there. And in 332 BC, an incredible prophecy was fulfilled by Alexander the Great here at this site. Now, in the 6th century BC, Tyre was a great Phoenician seaport. Merchandise from every country was passing in and out of her port of entry. They were the great mariners of the ancient world. They were the great seamen. They had a fleet of ships that would go across the Mediterranean to all the countries around the place and elsewhere. Their ships carried commerce to the then known world at the time. Their cedar wood, they were famous for their cedar wood. Very few of them left in there today. But their cedar was traded all around the ancient world, and ancient temples were adorned with the cedars of Lebanon. Their purple cloth was worn by kings and queens of every country. Their ships were as in every seaport. Now, in 586 BC, Tyre rejoiced at the fall of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, who invaded and destroyed Jerusalem. And Solomon's temple at the time was burned to the ground by the invasion of the Babylonians. Now, a few years earlier, in 597 BC, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel had been taken captive and deported to Babylon. And he was inspired to speak out against the evils of the Phoenician race. Now, it was a common practice of the Phoenician religion to sacrifice their children to pagan gods. Some years ago, I visited Carthage in North Africa. Today, the ruins of old Carthage are in the modern city of Tunis. And this site was a colony of Tyre. Alyssa of Tyre founded Carthage in the 9th century BC. And archaeologists have discovered there child sacrifice cemeteries dating back to the 6th century. The size of several football fields in size. And they're filled with these little gravestones that can be seen for thousands of children and babies. And under them, they found clay urns with the charred remains of their bones. They had been sacrificed to pagan gods. They found at least 20,000 of these clay urns, and mostly the urns contained the charred remains of babies up to about 3 months old, but some of the children were up to about the age of 5. No adults, just a massive scene of child cemeteries. And of course, it's been argued whether child sacrifice actually took place here. There's been debated and so forth, but evidence is continually coming to light, proving that this is indeed what happened. They were sacrificed to their bloodthirsty pagan gods in places called a Tophet. And this is the Tophet in Tunis, and old Carthage. It's a place of burning. And in fact, one report from the Oxford University said ancient Carthaginians really did sacrifice their children. After decades of scholarship denying that the Carthaginians sacrificed their children, new research has found overwhelming evidence that this ancient civilization really did carry out the practice. Now, is it any wonder then that the prophets of Israel would pronounce a doom sentence upon this Phoenician religion? Now, in the 6th century BC, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel, he wrote out the prophecy of his God concerning the great seaport cities of Phoenicia. So he said, "Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm against you, O Tyre, and I'm going to bring many nations against you, just like the sea casts up its waves, one after another. They will destroy the walls of Tyre, and they'll pull down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble, and I'll make her a bare rock." Now, as we read through, you've got to notice the plain language that the prophet is being inspired to say. He's going to make the site of Tyre like a bare rock. I mean, nothing left. Out of the sea, here's strange language now, out of the sea, she, or Tyre, will become a place to spread fishing nets. For I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. This is strange language, isn't it? You've got a city on land, it's going to become like a bare rock, and then it says, well, out of the sea, Tyre is going to become a place where they spread fishing nets. Well, what does all that mean? She will become plunder for the nations, and her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. Then they will know that I am the Lord. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. From the north I am going to bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, with horsemen and a great army. And he will ravage your settlements on the mainland with the sword, and he will set up his siege works against you, and he will demolish your towers with his weapons. And true to prophecy, Ezekiel was contemporary at the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. In 586 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and then a year later, in 585 BC, Nebuchadnezzar attacked and laid siege to this city of Tyre that was against his rule as well. And Nebuchadnezzar and his army destroyed the mainland city of Tyre, the Phoenician city on the mainland, was totally destroyed. But, not many of the Phoenicians died, because all they did is jump in their boats and they escaped to their island fortress that was about a kilometre off the coast. And they fortified that fortress, and the siege, Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't have any navy, he'd come from Iraq, across the land. And all he could do in the end, he couldn't conquer them. He couldn't conquer them because they were all over there on the island now with their naval ships and so forth. And so in the end, they agreed to pay Nebuchadnezzar some tribute money, and so Nebuchadnezzar went away. But he had destroyed the mainland city, left it in ruins, and put the people of Tyre under tribute, but he could not conquer them. Now notice what the prophet had said so far. He said Nebuchadnezzar would come and destroy old Tyre. Well, that did happen. Many nations would come. It wouldn't only be the Babylonians. Others would come. Her rubble would be scraped away, it says, and old Tyre would become like the surface of a bare rock. And Tyre would become a place to spread fishing nets in the midst of the sea, or out of the sea. Now, Nebuchadnezzar never fulfilled all that. He did destroy mainland Tyre, but it was just lying about in rubble now. Well, here we must pause over the romance of history. Alexander the Great, this is now 250 years later, Alexander the Great, hearing that the Phoenician ships of Tyre had assisted the Persians with whom he was at war, determined to punish the city and the people for their rebellion. So in 332 BC, Alexander, military genius extraordinaire, raged through the region of Palestine and finally attacked the island fortress of Tyre. Now Alexander got hold of some ships and he had a naval conquest of the island fortress, but he was repulsed and sort of defeated in that attack. And so Alexander's rage knew no bounds. He was not going to be defeated by anybody. He had never lost a battle. So he undertook one of the most remarkable military feats of recorded history in his determination to overthrow the proud city of Tyre. Now notice what the prophet said 250 years before. They will plunder your wealth, they'll loot your merchandise, they will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses, and this has all happened under Nebuchadnezzar, and they'll throw your stones, your timber and your rubble, where? Why would they bother? You destroy a city on the coast, why would you bother scraping up the rubble and tossing it into the ocean? That's just a waste of time. No one would do that. But Alexander had a reason. The mainland city had been abandoned and left in ruins for the past 241 years. It was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians. But the people of Tyre, since that time, were now living on what they believed to be an impregnable fortress on a small island about 1 kilometre off the coast. Now, Alexander, to overcome this people of Tyre on the island, decided to build a solid causeway 200 feet wide from the mainland out to the island. He used the stone and the timber from old Tyre to build his causeway straight out through the sea to the island fortress. And the archaeologists have written up a report about the overthrow of Tyre in this article, The Secret of How Alexander the Great Conquered Tyre. And this is what it says here. Archaeologists have known for some time that Alexander used the debris of the abandoned mainland city to build a causeway 3,000 yards long and up to 180 yards wide. And then here in this statement, it says the following. The causeway would have been built of timber, stone and rubble. The very words of Ezekiel. I will make you a bare rock, he said, and you'll become a place to spread fishing nets. And notice this strong language. You'll never be rebuilt. Now, I've had the privilege of wandering around the Middle East, coastal ancient cities and inland and so forth, and there are lots and lots, hundreds of archaeological sites. They're still there. Their rubble is there. Some of them have been destroyed and rebuilt over and over again, like Jerusalem, Damascus. Many cities, ancient cities, are still there and even inhabited. But he picks this one. Under inspiration, Ezekiel says, this city will never be rebuilt. And notice the prediction also was the site of the city would become like a bare rock. and its stones, timber and rubble would be thrown into the sea. Now, geologists believe that there was an underwater sand bridge deposited by wave action behind the island as the tide came in that Alexander exploited, so it was shallower. So he used the rubble of old Tyre, he scraped it up, he left the mainland city as bare as the top of a rock, took all the stone, timber and rubble and tossed it into the sea to build a land bridge so he could bring his siege ramps and attack the island fortress. That's exactly what he did. Because the prophet said it would then ultimately become a place for the spreading of fishing nets or nets in the midst of the sea. For I, the Lord, has spoken it, says the Lord God. Now, thankfully, I found a very old photo of this island. Today it's all built upon and, a modern village built there. But for centuries, fishermen have spread their nets along the silted up causeway. So you can see where the island was. And his causeway came out and it just became like a big sandbar. And guess what they were all fishermen there. They would go out there fishing and they'd spread their nets on the beach, which was the old causeway of Alexander that had silted up behind the island. Notice the historian Philip Myers, he said, Alexander the Great, after a most memorable siege, captured the city of Tyre and reduced it to ruins in 332 BC. The larger part of the site of the once great city is now bare as the top of a rock, a place where the few fishermen who still frequent the spot spread their nets to dry. It's still a fishing village today. Now this is in their harbour that was on their island fortress, you could say, but I just had to hold those nets to illustrate the fulfilment of the prediction, I guess. Now here's another, here it is today from Google Earth. This is the harbour where I was holding those nets there that was on the island. You can see Roman ruins. This would have been on the mainland. This is from a later era, the Roman era. And in between those Roman ruins and what was that island, you can see that sand bridge has all been built upon now. This is looking back from the island back to the mainland. So you can see all the buildings there. That's all been built up over what was Alexander's causeway. It's all the sand and has been silted up behind the island. And when I walked around, look, what can you see what's lying in the water? There's columns. Now they're not the Phoenician columns. They're not the rubble that was cast into the sea according to Ezekiel's prophecy, because Romans came later and they built on the island and so on. And these are Roman columns. But it just gives you an idea what they did. They grabbed this rubble and they tossed it into the sea to build this causeway there. You can see this fisherman in the bottom and right. He's standing on a whole pile of broken columns and so forth, doing his fishing there. Now, in the siege of Alexander, 8,000 of the people of Tyre were slain, 2,000 were crucified, and 30,000 were sold into slavery. I mean, he wiped them out. It took him 7 months to fulfill the prophecy, but fulfill it he did. He did. And Alexander had no idea that his military genius would establish the word of God, but so it stands today. A striking and compelling witness to the divine origin of the Bible story. And I believe God has revealed the future more accurately than humans can write the past. It's certain, these statements. Well, when I was walking around the island, I saw on the stony beach of Tyre a tyre. And something crept into my mind, so I picked it up. And I thought I might illustrate for you a modern fulfillment. So I took the ruins of that old Tyre and I tossed it into the sea. Because that's exactly what Alexander did with old Tyre. Threw it into the sea. And it's now the mainland site. No one knows where the mainland city was. They haven't excavated anything that is a Phoenician ruin on the mainland. Now, notice this. Ezekiel goes on. I will bring you to a horrible end. And it was a horrible end. Crucified and put into slavery and so on. You'll be no more. And then it says, though you are sought for. you will never again be found. Inspiration knew that people will be looking for the old city of Tyre. They're archaeologists, they're still looking for it. But they'll never again find it. Why not? Because it's buried in the sea today. When you visit Tyre, you can visit the archaeological site of Tyre. I've been there a couple of times. Here's the Roman arch at Tyre from the Roman period. They have a Roman hippodrome. They love their chariot races and so forth. There's a Roman hippodrome there at Tyre. This is Google Earth showing you the location of the hippodrome and the Roman arch there, Roman ruins and so on. Even a Roman necropolis, a burial site. And in the tombs or in the graves are Roman bones still there. But according to this archaeologist who wrote about the Phoenicians, he said virtually every trace of the Phoenician city of Tyre has been eliminated. It's gone, and it's gone forever. You can go and you can visit the vestiges of Tyre, and that which remains of Tyre today are not from Phoenician Tyre, but from the Roman period. Phoenician Tyre was buried in the sea, exactly as the prophet predicted 240 years before it happened. It's gone, and it's gone forever. Now, I find that absolutely compelling. It arrests my attention, and I'm so privileged to have been over there and seen it with my own eyes. You know, when Alexander was on his conquest, he pushed his conquest right up to the borders of India. And he had this famous battle with the elephants and, of India and so on. And he asked a guru over there, how can a man become a god? And the guru said to him, by doing something that a man cannot do. Let me tell you something, friends. Man can do many great and marvellous things. Is that so? I mean, they can fly 3 times the speed of sound. They can go to the moon and back. They can put satellites and missions to Jupiter and whatever else. But there's one thing man cannot do. Man cannot look down the road into the future and tell you what's going to happen with certainty. That's an impossibility. If we could tell the future, there wouldn't be so much money lost down at the racetrack. How did Ezekiel, a Jewish prisoner of war in Babylon in the 6th century BC, know so precisely the future of Tyre 250 years into the future? If there's no God. Let the atheists explain that to me. In the Battle of Gaugamela, or Arbela, a year later in 331 BC, the Persians were decisively defeated by Alexander the Great. Now let me show you a statement from the prophet Isaiah written in the 7th century BC. Remember, Alexander's in the 4th century, in the 300s BC. Isaiah is in the 700 plus BC, the 8th century BC. And this is what God says through his prophet Isaiah. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there's none like me. I like this statement. God is saying I'm unique. There is no other God under heaven that humanity has ever worshipped that comes close to me. Now what makes him unique? Well, he goes on and he says, I can declare the end from the beginning and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will do all my pleasure. In other words, this God says, I can predict from long ago that which is to happen in the future. And what I say, my counsel, my word, it will stand true in every detail. And he'll perform everything that he said would happen. Now, ancient Israel lived in the midst of pagan, idol-worshipping nations that were all around them. They were often tempted to be just like the other nations and worship similar idols. But the prophet Isaiah challenged them, or God, through the prophet Isaiah, challenged them with the words, these words. Present your case, says the Lord. Set forth your arguments, says Jacob's king. Tell us, you idols, what is going to happen. Tell us what the former things were so that we may consider them and know their final outcome, or declare to us things to come, tell us what the future holds so that we may know that you are God's. Wow, I like that. God is reasonable. Well, if all these other gods are true gods, let them reveal the future like I can. Now it goes on to say, do something, whether good or bad, so that we may be dismayed or filled with fear. Do something to prove if you're real gods. But you are less than nothing, your works are utterly worthless, and whoever chooses you is detestable. I am God, and there is no other. How am I unique? How is God God? Well, I can reveal the future. And we now are in the position, so far down, 2024 AD, we can look back and see that these predictions have been fulfilled exactly as the prophet said. And they provide strong evidence to believe. Not only that there is a God, but the Bible is his word, inspired from Genesis to Revelation. In fact, this author says in the book Prophecy Speaks, the Bible stakes everything on its ability to foretell the future. That's the evidence of its inspiration. If the Bible claim to make genuine predictions is true, then it's a miracle of foresight far beyond the ability of human sagacity to discern or to calculate, and is the highest evidence of the supernatural knowledge of the prophet. In other words, Bible prophecy provides the divine evidence to believe, to have a certain, confident faith that what is in the Bible is true. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found 8 fragments of the book of Daniel, covering all chapters. They don't have the whole book, but they have segments from all chapters except chapter 9 and chapter 12 in these fragments, going back to the 2nd century BC. Skeptical scholars said the book of Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now we know it was written in the 6th century BC. But in chapter 8, it gives an amazing prophetic vision of a ram and a male goat having a fight. These are prophetic symbols, but they're easy to understand because the Bible interprets them. So it says here in Daniel 8 verse 20, the ram which you saw having the 2 horns, they're the kings of the Medes and the Persians. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. So in other words, you've got this fight between the Persians and the Greeks, which we all know happened in history. And the vision goes on and it says how the goat defeats the ram. In other words, Greece and Persia will go to war and Greece will defeat Persia, which has been fulfilled in history. Well, I visited Pompeii, and in Pompeii they have some luxurious houses. The wealthy Romans would have their villas down by the Bay of Naples and so forth. This is the House of the Faun. And in the back there is it was like maybe a dining room or some sort of entertainment room, but it had a wonderful mosaic on the floor. And tourists come through and they look at this mosaic. By the way, it's not the original. They put a replica here. The original's in the Naples Museum. But on the floor of this house, someone wanted a scene from history on their floor, and they put there Alexander on his horse Bucephalus, and the wider picture shows his troops, and he's fighting Darius III of Persia in this battle. Here it is in the Naples Museum, Alexander on the left, and he's fighting against the Persians. And then in Daniel 8, you have exactly the same story given in prophetic vision hundreds of years before. So you have the goat of Greece fighting the ram of Persia. Now it goes on in Daniel 8, the male goat is the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. And anyone who knows anything about history, Alexander was the first king of a united Greece, and he went out and made war with the Persians. And so the large horn represents Alexander the Great. But then it goes on, therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken. Alexander was 20 when he began his exploits. He died at the age of, 30, in his early 30s. The large horn was broken, and then in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So in prophetic language, it says Alexander is going to go down, and in his place, there'll be a split of 4 kingdoms that will come out. Now, Alexander conquered the world by the age of 33. He was over in India. He was fighting everywhere, and his men got too tired. We've had enough. So they went back to Babylon. He was going to make that the capital of a vast Greek empire all over the Mediterranean. And he was in Babylon. Some say he drank the Herculean cup and got so drunk he got a fever and he died. But he died at 33. But on his deathbed, the tradition has it that his generals were gathered around and they asked him the question, who are you going to give your kingdom to? And Alexander's response was, to the strongest. Guess what happened after that? A fight amongst his generals, and it lasted 20 years, this infighting amongst his generals, until finally his empire was carved up into 4 divisions. How many? 4. Not 3, not 5, but 4. The large horn will be broken and up will come 4. And how many came up in history? 4. As the historian says, only 4 great powers now remained, the separate kingdoms of the ruthless monarchs of Ptolemy I, he was down in Egypt, Cassander of Greece, Seleucus of Syria, and Lysimachus, who extended his Thracian territories to include Western and Central Asia Minor, which is in Turkey. We know about the Ptolemies. Who was the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty? A woman. What was her name? Cleopatra, yes. She was the last of the Ptolemies. It was a dynasty in Egypt, but they weren't Egyptian. They were Persian, and then they were Greek period. So these are the territories. It was split up, Alexander's empire, into 4 divisions. Exactly, amazingly, exactly as the prophet said in the 6th century BC, 250 years before. The Jewish historian Josephus documented how Alexander the Great knew his destiny as a result of being shown the prophecies of Daniel. Notice from Flavius to Josephus, and when the book of Daniel was showed him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was the person intended, and as he was then glad, he dismissed the multitude for the present. There's a great famous painting over in Madrid, in the Museum of Del Prado, and it shows Alexander the Great entering the Jerusalem temple. You know, when he destroyed Tyre, he sent to Jerusalem, he said, you send down some troops to help me with my overthrow of Tyre. Well, you know, the Jews up there said, no way. We're in an alliance, you know, with the king of Tyre. So Alexander then determined that after he finished off Tyre, he would go and deal with Jerusalem. So he sent his troops up to Jerusalem, but the high priest in Jerusalem had a dream when they knew Alexander was coming. And then in the dream, this is all in Flavius Josephus, in the dream he was shown that he should get all his priests, dress them in their white gowns, and go out and greet and welcome Alexander to the city. Alexander was coming up for war and bloodshed. But when he saw these white priests marching out of the gates of Jerusalem, he remembered a dream that he had, according to Josephus, before he even left Macedonia and went over the Dardanelles in his conquest of the Persians. He had a dream where he saw these men dressed in white welcoming him And he felt that this was a divine dream showing that he should go and conquer the Persian Empire and so on. So when he saw these priests, he remembered his dream. And so he didn't destroy them. And the priest said, "Hey, we welcome you. By the way, we've been waiting for you. Our prophet predicted you hundreds of years ago. Come into the temple and I'll show you an ancient document, the book of Daniel." And they read the book of Daniel, chapter 8, and he supposed that he was the first king of Greece. So if the God of Israel knew who he was and said that he would conquer the Persians and so on, well, he was not going to mess with that God, but respect them and so on. Well, here it is. You can see what the priest is doing. He's showing him the book of Daniel, and he's pointing up there to the Ark of the Covenant, a symbol of the presence of God in the sanctuary, and basically saying, our God told us about you 250 years ago through our prophet Daniel. He was so impressed he didn't destroy Jerusalem. Daniel was written in the 6th century BC, more than 200 years before Alexander. You know, as this author says, Orley Berg, he says, fulfilled prophecy is one of the greatest evidences that the Bible is a divinely inspired book. I don't know why people turn away from the Bible. I can't, because the evidence is overwhelming for its inspiration. As Brian Ball says in his book, Predictions of the Future give God's Word, the Bible, the stamp of divine origin and credibility. You know, when I was 24, years go by pretty quick, I was riding through life like a bit of a fool. But the power of the Bible stopped me in my tracks. And there was certain very compelling evidence that literally changed my life from the fool I was back then. Number one was biblical, well, this is one of them, biblical archaeology. I knew something, and I've been learning ever since, of the astounding discoveries that confirm the history of the Bible. Not only the history, but the prophecies of the Bible too. Then secondly was intelligent design. I'm not talking about that, but you know what I'm talking about there. The scientific evidence of the universe, that the universe is not just come together by chance. And then there was Bible prophecy, and this would be at the top. This is so powerful and compelling to my mind, and you know, I was taught to be I was in my former working career as a computer programmer, and you have to think logically, and you have to try to work out all the possible errors that could come, you know, for the program not to fall over, sort of thing. And I brought that same kind of attitude to the Bible. I wanted to know all the objections. Do they have any validity, the objections, when it comes to Bible prophecy? And I haven't found any valid objections. In fact, the Bible prophecy is so overwhelming to me, I'm in continual amazement of it. And of course, the truths of the Bible, and not only that, what it's even done in my own life, the change that it wrought. And at 24, as a result of all that, God led me to the truth. I accepted the Christ of the Bible, and I was baptized back in 1985. And this wonderful world of biblical archaeology, of its biblical history and prophecy, it made a profound difference to my life because it provided a solid platform of evidence upon which to build a very rational and certain and confident faith. And the evidence is overwhelming, let me tell you. It's overwhelming. You can trust the Bible. Biblical archaeology says it's accurate and continues to say it's accurate. Its history is accurate. Its prophetically inspired words are accurate. The Bible prophecies are accurate. And so if any of us are sitting on the fence of indecision or watching online, might I appeal to us to come out of the cold of unbelief and uncertainty and into the warmth of a faith that's built on evidence, on certainty, a foundation of truth. In fact, God himself appeals to humanity through the wisdom of Solomon. And God says, haven't I written to you excellent things of counsels and knowledge? Haven't I? That I might make you know the certainty of the words of truth. This is the reason he's given Bible prophecy, so that we might know the certainty of the words of truth. God wants you to have certainty. He wants me to have certainty. Not something that's just, built up on an emotional crutch or anything like that, or a hand-me-down from our ancestors or faith or something. No, a personal experience built on evidence, a solid platform that gives you certainty. You know you're doing the right thing at the right time in history. Well, I found the Bible a marvellous book. And so to finish off in our next session, I just want to take you around the Middle East a little bit and show you just some of these absolutely mind-blowing, wonderful, thrilling discoveries. And I'm trying to pick the top 7 for you in our next session, the top 7 of these discoveries. So let's have a break and we'll come back for our last session. Thank you.